Welcome to the podcast. Today I'm joined by Paul Jones. Paul's an automotive industry veteran. He started off at Foden Trucks before moving to Bentley and ascended to the role of Director of Product Management at Bentley. In Paul's career, he's overseen three landmark historic cars of the British motor industry, Bentley Continental, Bentley Flying Spur, and he's been involved in the Bentayga as well, Bentley's luxury four-wheel drive SUV. Today, Paul spends his time as Chief Exec of the Northern Automotive Alliance, working with British automotive supply chain companies and SMEs to ease the transition to net zero and ensure that we've got a promising bright future for the British auto sector. Paul, welcome to the table.
Thanks, Andrew. Great to be here.
Fantastic. You've got a really interesting career background. So started off as a lad in North Wales.
A long career background, yeah, long time ago.
Mechanical engineering at Manchester University.
Manchester Polytechnic.
And then you went to work for...
I've actually first went to work for Greater Manchester Transport, the bus company. So second largest passenger transport executive outside London. And yeah, a bit of a parallel there we'll come to later with W.O. Bentley, working for London Taxis early in his career. So yeah, and passenger transport executives back in those days were government funded. They were running 2,500 buses, they had 5 engineering works, 20 operating garages. So it was really quite a big business. And buying around about sort of 500 vehicles a year, which was probably about 30% of the annual output of the UK bus industry.
Okay.
So it's pretty big business. And we were ahead of commercial vehicles at the time. We were messing around with things like electronic transmission, disc brakes. We even had a diesel hybrid running back in 1986 with little 3-cylinder Hatz diesel running at constant speed, driving a hybrid motor. The problem was the electronics at the time were just not there, and we really struggled with the control system on it. But we did some really interesting and exciting things there, and I guess one of the lessons it taught me there before I moved into heavy commercial vehicles and road haulage was passenger transport. You've only got 2 opportunities during the day. You've got the peak in the morning and you've got the peak in the evening. So if the bus doesn't go out in the morning or in the evening, it's no good going out later in the day. You've missed it. So reliability was everything. So that taught me a lot in those first couple of years. I was the customer back in those days, but I had this itch to scratch. I wanted to work for a manufacturer. And for me, it was great being an operator and a really big fleet operator and having some say in the design of buses of the future. But it wasn't working for a manufacturer. So in 1988, I moved to Foden Trucks at Sandbach. Foden, the oldest commercial vehicle, the oldest commercial vehicle manufacturer in the world.
Okay.
Started in 1856. So great heritage. So I moved there, American owned. So everything was built to order. So nothing was built for stock. So it was a custom build philosophy. It wasn't a vertically integrated manufacturer. So you think about vertical integration, it's where you make the vehicle, you make the engine, you make the axles, you make the transmission, you make everything in-house. It was a proprietary build. So we basically chose the best components, chose the best engines, the best transmissions, the best axles. We made the chassis in-house, we made the cab in-house. But it was great. I learned an awful lot. And we had a lot of interesting customers. Shell Oil was a big customer of ours. Ministry of Defence, very big customer. Made these 8x6 artillery shell carriers called drops, demountable roll-off palletized system. So they could carry shells, they could carry a field hospital. As long as it weighed less than 15 tons, they could take 15 tons of anything virtually anywhere.
And you took that into the career as you progressed. I mean, how do you go from Foden Trucks to being involved in the design team and engineering the Bentley's first luxury four-wheel drive? So
I started my time at Foden on the drawing board. So you've got to start with design. You have to learn the design process, what goes into designing a product. Be it a car, a truck, be it anything. So 2 years in the design office on a drawing board in those days.
Yeah,
it was a long time ago. I think we had one AutoCAD terminal in the drawing office
in 2D,
2D for wiring diagrams and air braking circuits. Yeah. So drawing board with a pencil. I was always really messy because I'm left-handed, so my drawings were always smudged. Always a challenge to try and keep them clean. So a couple of years, I did chassis design, I did powertrain design. I then went into what was known as the experimental department. So that was where we kind of tested the vehicles. It's a lot of work with instrumentation there, doing noise analysis, vibration analysis, crash testing, durability testing. built a digital twin back in 1994. So basically using, you'd call it digital twin now, but using a software package called Adams. So basically build a dynamic model of the truck, put the truck on a Belgian block pavé, so a kind of cobbled circuit down at MIRA, Motor Industry Research Association, instrumented up to measure displacement. And then if you differentiate that signal, you get velocity, and if you differentiate it twice, you get acceleration. So basically you can measure the inputs into the truck along a pavé. We then had a spectral density for that pavé, which MIRA had measured. So you're then able to put that input digitally into your Adams model and compare the truck with the model. And once you get correlation, then you can start to play about with the model, and you can make iterations to the model rather than the truck. So I guess it was a very, very early version of digital twin. That was back in about 1994, 1995. So yeah, it's interesting.
So what point in your career did you decide you wanted to kind of move off the tools and move off the drawing board and the test into leadership?
So I was always curious. I always wanted to get involved in new stuff. So back when I was in the test and development department, I did brake testing, I'd done steering testing. If cooling testing came up and I hadn't done it, I put my hand up. I'd like to do that. I'd like to do data analysis, road load data analysis, all these. So I was always hungry to get on and want to do stuff and take more responsibility. I always kind of put myself out there. I was always the first to put my hand up to do these kind of things. And it took me, for example, to the US. Parker had a technical center in the US, sort of midway between Seattle and Vancouver. And I learned some sort of really high-tech stuff out there because it was very close to Everett, which is, if you know anything about aircraft, that's Boeing's headquarters. So there was a huge crossover between commercial vehicles and aircraft in terms of the technology, in terms of lightweighting, structural analysis, data acquisition. So I learned a lot out there as well. And I guess you add all these to your toolkit, in your management toolkit, or professional toolkit in inverted commas. So in about 1995, I had the opportunity to move. Late 94, had the opportunity to move back into the design office, and I ran a section known as customer engineering. So basically that was taking the Meccano kit of the existing product and kind of building it in certain configurations for customers. So we weren't developing anything new at that stage. We were just playing with the
existing. So you're doing semi-customizability or semi-custom build from existing kind of.
So I spent about a year doing that. And then I got the opportunity. There was movements in the office, and I got the opportunity to move into my then boss's job as engineering operations manager. So I spent a couple of years doing that. So engineering operations is the kind of shop window of engineering to the rest of the business and the rest of the world. So if you think about engineering being broadly split into two, you've got R&D on the one side, and you've got operations on the other side. So operations, these are the people that generate the bills of materials. These are the people. You have the liaison engineers that work between the assembly plant and the design office if there's any problems. This is the applications people. A truck's a complex beast. It could have multiple different bodies on it. It could be coupled to different types of trailers. So you have a group of applications engineers who work with all these other suppliers whose kit is going to be integrated into the truck, and also work with the end customers as well to make sure they get what they want. The customer engineering team were under me, and the legislation team were under me as well, what we call homologation and type approval. Type approval is where you develop a variant of vehicle and then you certify it to make sure it meets all the relevant requirements, be that safety, be it noise, be it exhaust emission, and then you're allowed to build trucks of that type. Then they don't need individual inspection then, as long as they conform to the design that you've type approved or certified.
Still go in single vehicle
absolutely.
If you do a kick
well, the single vehicle, if you don't, type approval is quite a lengthy and time-consuming process. So IVA or individual vehicle approval is the alternative for very, very low volume, but that means every vehicle needs to be sort of inspected off the end of the line. And we were building in those days about 45 trucks a week, so it's just not feasible to inspect every one off the end of the line. So I spent a couple of years doing operations. So to move from pure R&D, from the design office and development into this sort of shop window was a bit of a shock to start with, and kind of from this is not real engineering. But I quickly realised that to climb the management ladder, you need to be rounded. You need to have that exposure to as much as possible. And of course, engineering in any business is just one cog in the machine. So, it brought me into contact with sales and marketing. It brought me into contact with the purchase people. It brought me into contact with the materials people. It brought me into contact with the legal people. So it brought me into contact with all these other, and production obviously as well. So it brought me into contact with all these other elements of the business that hadn't really previously been exposed to, kind of been buried in design and in development. Sometimes, you don't see that. And you need that appreciation of, the wider business, your customers, or your internal customers, if you like. And obviously gave me a lot of exposure to the outside world as well, in terms of meeting the end users and meeting suppliers of equipment as well. So I did that for a couple of years, and I really enjoyed it. And I got to work with some great companies. One notable one was Schlumberger, the oil exploration people.
Okay.
They used to make these trucks called a wireline truck. They still do. So basically it's a truck with for want of a better word, like a porter cabin on the back, full of equipment. So they will go to where they're drilling for oil. It could be the middle of the States, it could be the Middle East, it could be Alaska. And basically where they're drilling for oil, they will drop basically instrumentation probes on a wire, literally down into the ground. And these things go down to like 10,000 feet. And they basically take a series of measurements so they can tell the sort of size of the oil field, where you're positioned within the oil field when you're drilling. So these wireline trucks, we built about 300 of those for Schlumberger. But I got involved in the original contract. It took me out to Schlumberger's headquarters in Austin, Texas. So really sort of high tech environment around there. Texas Instruments was there. 3M were there.
Wow.
So just great place to go and experience sort of what was going on there.
So in your 20s, then those kind of career moves you made, were you consciously strategic about the experiences? Did you know you wanted to be director level? Did you know you wanted to be board level?
I became strategic when I moved back into design, and certainly when I got the operations job, and I realised then that, hang on, I'm getting quite rounded here. I'm getting a lot of opportunity here, which maybe some of my peer group hadn't got.
Because you were coming up at a challenging time for British automotive.
We had a recession.
They weren't easy years.
No, we had a recession in the early 90s. We had a downturn in sort of 91, 92. And I can remember weeks when we sold 2 or 3 vehicles. It was that bad. And, again, talk about driven. There's a notable occasion. It's almost the Norman Tebbit, get on your bike. I brought up in North Wales. My dad was involved in road haulage, so I had a lot of people I knew who had trucks. So I kind of went to the sales guys one day at Foden and said, look, can I borrow a demonstrator? Can I take it? I know a lot of people in North Wales. Can I take it to a quarry?
Yeah. And
just see some people and see if we can get some business. So I pitched up in this quarry. It was a bright pink 8-wheeler. We used to call it the Pink Panther, And we sold 1 truck that week, and it was a truck I sold.
Fantastic. And you got commission on that?
No, I didn't get commission on it, no, but I kept my job, So, yeah. So, I got very involved then in supporting the sales side, like with Schlumberger, going out and meeting customers and sort of being quite hands-on. And I think, customers appreciate that. You're not some kind of slick salesman. You're just some straight-talking engineer. You probably say the wrong things half the time, and you certainly don't get involved in negotiating the price. But I enjoyed that, supporting the sales side of things. So a couple of years doing engineering operations. Then there were moves around again. This was late 96. And I then became design and development manager. So I went from running operations to running the other side, to running all the R&D. So I did that for 4 years. Had a fantastic time. In that time, PACCAR bought DAF trucks in the Netherlands.
Leyland.
Leyland comes later. So they bought DAF trucks in early 97. DAF is now the market leader in the UK. It's got about 30% of the market. So in the summer of 97, I was dispatched off to Eindhoven for a couple of years, on and off, while we developed a new range of trucks, basically utilising the best of Foden and the best of DAF. And the development was done over in Eindhoven because obviously we didn't want customers to get wind of the fact we were developing something new and stop buying the existing product. That's always a challenge when you're making product, is you don't want to tell people about your new product too soon, because you've got to keep making the old product to keep the factory busy. You can't just sort of shut the factory, send everybody home and say, come back in 2 years when the new product's ready. So this was all done over in Eindhoven. in the south of the Netherlands. So I had a couple of great years on and off over there, travelling backwards and forwards, Sandbach to Eindhoven, lots of air miles, learned a bit of Dutch along the way. So I did that for a couple of years. Then when I came back in sort of late 98, we had decided to develop a successor range of trucks. So I then got appointed as program manager. I seem to have this habit from there on of having two roles simultaneously in the company. So I was design and development manager, responsible for all of the Alpha range of trucks as it was. But I was also the program manager. So I was running the whole program for the whole business-wide, if you like. So that was my first sort of real exposure into program management. So I did that for a couple of years. Meantime, you mentioned Leyland. PACCAR had bought Leyland. So the Leyland truck plant up in Preston, that was a plant with a capacity of about 30,000 vehicles a year. The Foden plant had a capacity of about 6,000 vehicles a year. We were both running at half capacity, so it wasn't difficult to see what was going to happen. The logical thing was to put all the Foden product into the Leyland plant. So I basically engineered the second generation of Alpha truck to be built in a factory 50 miles up the road from where I lived and worked. So and I guess essentially you could say engineered myself out of a job. Not really. I could have gone to Leyland, but I didn't want to drive up the motorway every day, 50 miles. So at the time, the Volkswagen Group had just taken over Bentley, and there's some big expansion going on in Crewe, which is only kind of 6 miles across the field from Sandbach, where I was living. So I applied to Bentley, and I joined Bentley in October, 9th of October 2000. I joined Bentley.
That's a couple of years after the acquisition by VW.
Yeah, they've been acquired in mid-98.
Right.
So VW was still kind of putting their print on the place. So I arrived, and the go-ahead had been given for the Continental GT, but it was still far from a frozen product, if you like.
So you're presumably leaving behind a kind of program team that you've sort of mentored and built. So there's a lot of people that you've brought up the ladder with you as you're leaving.
Yep.
Is that's part of your MO? Is it is to kind of mentor people and advance them? I shouldn't
mention that I brought most of them to Crewe with me then.
But again, it's
about
leadership.
It's about giving people opportunities. That you should be looking for your successors. You should be training. No one is indispensable in a business, and you should be looking to bring up that next generation. Give them the opportunity.
So what's the onboarding process at that level at Bentley then, as you kind of coming into Bentley? Presumably it's not just a come in, application form, and interview.
No, I think I had 2 or 3 interviews, psychometric tests. So yeah, quite rigorous.
And is it dealt with just at the brand level?
Just dealt with a brand level at Crewe. Yeah. So I became the chief program engineer for the Continental GT. So I led the engineering program up until we put the car into production, which was in early 2004. So while
this is the original Continental.
This is the original first generation Continental GT. So resurrecting an iconic name. The Continental was an iconic product in the 1950s. It was as much as a detached house in terms of price. It was a 4-seat, 120 mile an hour Continental cruiser. So we kind of tried to. That's what we were aiming for. And we always knew there was going to be a range of cars, but the first car was always going to be a coupe, because a coupe is bought with the head, not the heart. So the heart, not the head. So it's more of an emotional purchase. So we wanted to go with the coupe first. And if the coupe, you've got some latitude as well if it's not quite perfect.
So it's coupe then drop top.
No, it was coupe. It was coupe. There was originally no plans for a drop top.
Okay.
So it was coupe. Saloon or sedan came a year later, and the convertible came a year after that. So, where were we? 2000, we're developing the Continental GT. We decided what engine we wanted in it. We sort of shaped up the concept, and we were on our way then. And these were real growing pains for Bentley. I mean, Bentley had been, or Rolls-Royce and Bentley Motor Cars, as it still was then, had been making about 1,000 cars a year. 1,500 cars a year, and we were going to go make 10,000 cars a year. So everything has to scale up. And what you have to remember is it's great to think about, well, we can make 10 times as many of this product going forward, but with volume comes risk.
particularly in a premium brand.
With any product, be it a car, be it anything you're making, the more of it you make, the more risk you're exposed to.
Okay.
Therefore, the more rigorous you have to be in terms of your governance, in terms of your systems, your processes, your control. Because if it was Bentley and you're making 30 cars a week and there's a problem with a component, on a Saturday morning, the cars can be reworked outside on the car park. If you're making 10,000 cars and you're making sort of 200, 220 a week, then very quickly you can get into very, very, very big issues. So, the whole business has to mature as that volume goes up.
So you did that very quickly. Was that a process that was supported by Germany? Did they bring a whole team in, or were you guys recruited at Bentley to, there was a conscious effort to recruit locally?
No,
to,
it was
to
a
be able to
mix. It
scale?
was a mix of both. Obviously, a lot of learning from the group, and we had a very good CEO who I later worked for directly, a gentleman called Dr. Pefkin, who had been CEO of Audi, and then came to be joint CEO of Bentley and Bugatti, and really brought that sort of big company discipline with him, but was an Anglophile through and through. He kind of got the British culture. He just loved everything about Britain. And that was one of the great things, again, that Volkswagen do with brands. They respect the history and the culture of a brand, and they don't try and put their own sort of stamp on it. The brands like Bentley, they're about stories. They're about legends. The Bentley boys, the 1920s, winning Le Mans 5 times. That's what people are buying into. When they buy into a brand like that, they're buying into that history.
Yeah.
They're buying into all of those stories. So Volkswagen Group really respected the brand. So obviously it was a hard slog for 3 years engineering that car. We'd never engineered anything like that before, to be built in that kind of volume, to be built at that kind of price point. So we'd looked at what was there that was between 100 and 150,000, which was a kind of 2-door, 4-seat coupe. And there just wasn't anything there that sold in any volume. You'd got sort of a Ferrari 456, for example, was probably the nearest. You might say Mercedes S-Class coupe, but that's really more of a premium as opposed to a luxury brand. So we found our white space in marketing speak in that sort of 100 to 150,000 bracket. When Continental GT was launched in 2004, it was 110,000 was the sort of base price, which seems, it's such good value now. So we really found our space there. So car went into production in 2004. Help along the way. So as well as the group, we had McKinsey come in, McKinsey consultants, and we looked at a matrix organisation. And matrix organisations, if you've ever worked in them, are a real challenge because you don't actually have line management control over the people.
Yeah.
So you're not responsible for their pay and their rations and their end-of-year appraisal. So it's a lot harder in terms of managing. But you can manage a much bigger team. So obviously, running the engineering programme, I had all the classic engineering disciplines: chassis, powertrain, body, trim, electrical. And then in 2004, we had another move around just as the car went into production, and I became the program director. So I assumed responsibility for all aspects then, so not just the engineering, but from the sales and marketing, from the very initial sales and marketing research to the first sketches in styling, all the way through to after sales and spare parts at the other end and everything in between. So I was project director for nearly 6 years for the Continental. Then the Flying Spur, as we said, followed quickly afterwards in 2005, and the GT followed in 2006. And then that spawned a whole series of derivatives. We had a Speed and a Super Sports, because every time we looked to make the car a bit sportier, we found there was a customer appetite to make it even more sportier again. So that culminated in the Super Sports, which was a 630 horsepower car, which ran on biofuel if you wanted it to. It could run on 85% biofuel, bioethanol. This is back in 2009. Not without its problems, because alcohol and water mix very well. So one of the problems you get running on bioethanol is it's quite corrosive, and it mixes with water, so you can get water in the fuel system and things like that. So it brings a whole set of different challenges. So program director or project director rather, up until 2010. That was reporting into the head of product management, as it was in those days, who reported into the CEO. So I'd escaped the clutches of engineering back in 2004 and moved into the sort of CEO's arena. 2010, we had a move around again, and I became the director of product management then. So all the vehicle line teams, so my previous team, obviously looking after the mid-size family of cars, the Continental, Flying Spur and the convertible, reported into me. Then we had the Mulsanne, the big coach-built car. Yeah. That team reported into me. Its predecessor, the Arnage, and the successor to the Continental, the second-generation Continental. So all the vehicle line teams then reported into me as Director of Product Management. So my role was essentially split into two. So half of it was the vehicle line teams reporting into me, as I said. The other half then was being responsible for product strategy. So I was responsible for all Bentley's future product strategy. Wow. So responsible for the group, for the Bentley cycle plan, kind of 15 to 20 year horizon. You know, where do we go next?
Where do you start with that when you're looking at 15, 20 year? Okay, so it's probably 2-3 product cycles for you guys, I guess.
Building a product plan, the steps you would take, you would start typically with the legals, because they're not negotiable. And what you find when you look at, we see new cars on the road, we see certain cars have stopped being made. Generally, it's legislation that's driven that. There's been a piece of legislation which means a certain product that's out there on the market. Take the original Land Rover Defender. Mm-hmm. Stopped making it in 2015. I was lucky enough to have one of those.
In a very nice colour.
Legislation stopped it, basically, because the
emissions crash tests.
New emission crash, other legislation, you know, EMC, electromagnetic compatibility, etc. New pieces of legislation would have meant it would have been too costly to redesign the product. You would never got a business is about making money at the end of the day. You wouldn't have got a return on redesigning that product to meet the new legislation. So legislation tends to kill product. So you start your product cycle plan with legislation. You put markers down. Where are the major pieces of legislation?
So we're seeing that at the moment with EVs, with the EV transition.
Absolutely. So we know 2035, everything must be zero emission by then. There will be no pure petrol or diesel products beyond 2035. And we know currently that by 2030, 80% of product needs to be zero emission. So you put your legal markers down, and they're going to constitute a major event internally in terms of engineering a vehicle. You then, if you're a big group like Volkswagen, where Bentley is part of, you're going to be sharing componentry. You're going to be developing and sharing componentry across the group. So you would look at availability componentry. So if you wanted a certain new type of engine, let's say, for example, and it was only going to be ready at a certain point, then that represents other markers on your, it's like drawing a calendar, this. Then we'd look at competitors. We do competitor analysis. Best example might be the Flying Spur and the Mercedes S-Class saloon. So you typically look at when a new S-Class is coming out, and you'd want to make sure you've got something competitive at that time. So we've got legislation, we've got platform and componentry availability, and we've got competitor analysis. And then you've got technology roadmaps as well. So you typically have roadmaps of technologies that will be available. It might be electrical architecture, it might be certain autonomous driving features, or other things which are being developed and are going to come to market. So you put some markers down for those. So you can see now you've got this framework, this structure of things which are dropping into place. And then you build your product cycle plan around those points. But typically you would have a 7-year production lifespan for a new vehicle. And then probably look to get 2 generations for the vehicle platform, the basic vehicle architecture. So that would run for 14 years. You have a midlife refresh sort of 4 years into your vehicle's life.
And is that changing much now? Has the industry changed today to where it was previously?
One of the big things we're seeing change with the industry is time to bring product to market. So if we go back to Director of Product Management role again, we mentioned the vehicle lines reporting into me. We mentioned the future product strategy. The other piece of the jigsaw I held was the product creation process, or the product emergence process, as we called it within Bentley. So that's the sort of backbone process of the company which delivers a new car. So that was 48 months. And we are typically seeing those starting to be compressed these days with more, we mentioned digital twins earlier, certainly with more digital activity going on, we're seeing those cycle times starting to be shortened, products being brought to market quicker. And I think customers have always got an appetite for something, what's new, what's fresh, particularly in that kind of market. You know, they always want latest and greatest.
Is that something that's changed culturally within the automotive sector that you guys have been able to plan for and legislate for in terms of training and progression, or is it something that the market's kind of forced upon you?
I think the market and competitors have forced it upon us. You know, and we've particularly seen with the Chinese the amount of product that they're bringing to market.
So. Biggest challenges for you then? So you've grown a team in Bentley, sort of high stakes recent acquisition. You've been brought in as part of kind of the new generation of Bentley. What were the big challenges for you culturally? What were the big challenges for you building a new team or a growing team in that business?
I think there's a couple of periods I can think of. I can certainly think about 2004 when we first put the car into production. So before that, 3.5, 4 years developing the Continental GT, very focused, very structured, got this end point, got to get a car into production. Once we'd gone into production, we went from 700 cars a year in 2002 to 7,000 cars a year in 2004. So growing this business exponentially, almost tenfold, and having to bring everybody along. All of a sudden you're in the hot seat in terms of being the program director for this vehicle, and it's no longer the program director for a vehicle that's being developed, it's the program director for a vehicle that's in production. It's the lifeblood of the company. Yeah. Everybody's relying on this. Yes, we still build an Anage and we make a few hundred of those a year, but actually we're making 7,000 of this thing a year. So trying to bring a team along, give them space, give them support. It was a very interesting journey at the time. I think for me, my biggest challenge is if I fast forward to 2010, the mid-size family of cars, Bentley was, my analogy is like a single cylinder engine. So it's got one range of cars, 7-year life cycle. So when the mid-size family of cars are doing well, the business is doing well. When the mid-sized family of cars are not doing well and at the end of their life, you're having to throw more money at them, the volume's going down, your income is less, and you've got a perfect storm because the successor product, you are about to lay down tooling for that. So you're at the most expensive point in the development of that. So your existing product is bringing in the least income of its life cycle. Your intended new product, successor product, is causing you maximum expenditure, so you reach a perfect storm.
So this is why the big mainstream brands kind of modulate their different brand lines. So new SUV this year, new compact next year.
So if you think about it like a sine wave on a sort of 7-year wavelength, we needed another vehicle 3.5 years apart. So 2010 became director of product management. The first brief I was given was a program portfolio expansion. We needed to broaden Bentley's portfolio to make it financially sustainable.
So that's a deliverable on top of your existing job description.
Yeah, well, it's core really to the. It was a strategic project, so I guess core in some ways to my duty as my duties and responsibilities as director of product management. So clean sheet of paper. What do you do? So the tempting thing to do is to sort of run off and say, yeah, we'd like to make a small, sexy sports car. You have to approach these things in a very rational way. So the very first thing I did was I wrote 7 strategic objectives down on the piece of paper with a team.
Why 7?
And I can't remember why it was. There's no magic to the number 7. I think it was 7. I'd have to go back. And we took that to the board. So this was developed over a period of time. I took it to the board and got agreement on that. So at this stage, we weren't even talking about a product. So, strategic objective number 1, to make Bentley financially sustainable in the future. These are not in any order, by the way. Number 2, to reduce Bentley's fleet CO2 emission, to increase its synergy with the Volkswagen Group in terms of usage of
turnover, legislative compliance,
platform parts,
efficiency.
Yeah, to improve brand appeal, broader audience. So they're what for? I can't remember the other three. It's been a long time. But basically, it's about very methodically like that, thinking, let's not talk about product now. Let's not talk coupe, convertible, SUV, pickup truck, whatever you like. Let's talk about what does this product need to do for this business. And it's laying out those objectives. So that's how we started. So it's about, first of all, as a board, and then ultimately as a group, the wider Volkswagen Group, getting agreement on, right, are these the objectives we are pursuing? And then from that, to start to set some targets around sort of what kind of volume we think we're going to be looking for, what kind of expenditure we think we could afford, what selling price would be, what the material cost would be, do we have the makings of a business case? And then there would be a certain return on investment that as a luxury brand we would be expected to achieve, and it would be, without divulging corporate secrets, it would be well into double digits. Whereas you might look at volume car brands today, they are low single digit in terms of return on investment. And some of the more recent ones, the electric vehicles have been zero or even negative. So we're looking for a healthy double digit return on investment. So what do we do? So this was challenging time, blank sheet of paper. The spotlight's on you to assemble a team. So assemble the senior team from across the business. And then we started with the customer, because at the end of the day, it's all about the customer. No customer, no business. We brought in some external consultants to look at the marketplace and to look at different lifestyles. You split people into different milieu in marketing speak, and we looked at where were the growing opportunities. SUV, growing in every segment. So in terms of vehicle size, the move from conventional sedan to SUV, growing in every market worldwide.
Yeah.
So we were faced with a growing global market and no true luxury player in there. So go back to Continental. When we found our white space with Continental, typically when you're looking at segmenting cars, you plot length versus price. And when we did that with the Continental, we found our coupe sweet spot between 100 and 150,000, where nobody else was playing in any volume, and that's where we put Continental. When we came to do the SUV, one of the guys in sales and marketing had this brilliant idea. Why don't we plot height versus price?
Right.
So
okay.
we plotted height versus price, and we quickly got to Range Rover. And I think if we ticked every option box on a Range Rover autobiography, we could get it to £120,000. And we said, right, there's nothing beyond there. That's where we're going.
This was somebody's job, was to sit on the couch and go through the websites and the customizer had all the options.
So we very quickly said, that's where we're going. And the driving strapline for the project or the program became, we'll start where others finish. So in simple terms, you could take a Range Rover to 120,000 with every box. We said we put 20k of clear water between us and them, and we'll start at 140,000. And it quickly took shape from there. And a bit like with the Continental GT, looking at sort of all the two-door, four-seat coupes out in the market today from others. Look at the luxury SUVs today. You've got the Rolls-Royce Cullinan. You've got the Ferrari Purosangue, you've got the Lamborghini Urus, you've got all these other luxury SUVs, but we were the very first out there. We defined the D segment luxury SUV.
And that innovation and that business case came from the British brand level rather than group level, and
it came from Crew. It came from the British brand level. It came from Crew. Yeah.
So that
we
saw a
defined
market opportunity that the rest of the world is now.
I forgot to mention Aston Martin DBX in there as well. That's the other one. Yeah.
Fantastic. So you're moving into Bentayga. That's a high risk strategy. How do you go about making the business case for that within group? That couldn't have been an easy process.
No, it's not an easy. And again, I mentioned the sort of parameters of a business case before. You would start with the cost side of the business. You need to know your costs. What's it going to cost you to produce in terms of what's your R&D? How much are you going to spend on development? How much are you going to spend on tooling? And what are your piece part price going to be? Any business, you need to have control of your costs. Then you go and look at the pricing and the volume. Because the tempting thing is to always go, well, we could sell a few more to make the business case work, or we could charge a bit more to make the business case work. That should be the last thing you do. You need to know what your costs of sales are and start from that. So typically for a vehicle like that, you're looking at somewhere in the high hundreds of millions in terms of capital investment for a product like that. Do your sensitivity on your business case. So you come up with a business case, then we look at, right, for every extra 10 million we spend, what does that do to the return on investment in terms of percentage? For every 1,000 more euros it is in terms of unit costs, what does that do? So you can play about with your sensitivities. So you might go in with your agreed business case, but then you would show a sensitivity matrix to say, okay, yeah, and we have looked at we have stress tested this because markets can collapse. We can have inflation, price of materials can go, and even labour. In terms of R&D and things like that, we've seen wage hikes over the last few years with inflation. Those kind of things can run away with you if you're not careful. So you need to stress test your business model. That is really, really important.
So what lessons do you think we've got to learn from that? You've had the process of doing that within a bigger international group. Is that something we need to focus on as a country, is to get in entrepreneurs and people in management roles in bigger organisations to the point where they do see that bigger picture on an international stage, so we're not just developing products for ourselves or for the first cohort of customers?
I think firstly it's important to be developing products full stop, isn't it? We need to manufacture things in this country. We need to create the wealth. We've got a very strong services sector. We've got a very strong financial and investment sector. But where does the money come from for that tertiary sector? It comes from the primary and secondary sectors.
Making the stuff.
And in terms of secondary sector, we're talking manufacturing, aren't we? So we need to carry on making stuff. And if you look at UK automotive industry, employs about 180,000 people directly, about 800,000 people in the wider supply chain. Contributes about 22 billion GVA, gross value add. Exports are worth about 50 billion. I think it accounts for something like 14% by value of all the exports this country makes. So it was a great piece in the Labour industrial strategy document that was released last year, and the opening paragraph talked about it being the jewel in our manufacturing crown, which, having spent nearly 40 years of my life in, I absolutely agree with. So it's really important to make things, and this country can make world-class product.
And that's kind of your mission you're on now at the NAA. That's you're bringing the automotive supply chain along. You're making sure that we have a future in manufacturing and in automotive. And
absolutely. And it sounds a bit cliched, but this sector is undergoing an unprecedented degree of change. You might argue it's the biggest since we moved away from steam to petrol and diesel in the sort of the 1910s with cars and the 1920s, 30s with trucks, obviously driven by legislation. We need to decarbonise. We all know climate change is an issue. Look at the adverse weather conditions we see around the world all the time. So we need to decarbonise. Road transport is responsible for just under 30% of all greenhouse gas. So we know as an industry we need to decarbonise. So what's NAA's mantra, or our strategic objectives, if you like to go back to the earlier sort of rationale? It's the two Ds I talk about. I talk about decarbonisation and I talk about digitalisation. And two strands to decarbonisation for me. There's decarbonising the product in terms of pivoting from petrol and diesel to some zero emission product, zero tailpipe emission, so battery electric, probably hydrogen fuel cell or even hydrogen combustion in the longer term. But the second strand of decarbonisation is decarbonising your manufacturing footprint. So irrespective of what you're making, how do you do that with the lowest carbon footprint? Mm-hmm. And that's, for me, where the other D comes in, the digitalisation. And I think we've seen through some of the programmes we've worked on together in the past, the power of digital to be an enabler for decarbonisation. Things like machine monitoring, smart factories, All this stuff helps in terms of having a lower carbon footprint going forward. So digitalisation also important for us to ensure that British-based companies retain their competitiveness. You've got to remember a lot of British-based manufacturing operations are satellite to larger global corporations.
Yeah.
So it's important that the UK remains attractive and competitive as a base for these people to continue to invest in the future. And digital's a key enabler for that. So if we can help companies digitally upskill today to keep them competitive such that they attract that foreign direct investment in the future to make these next generation low carbon or zero emission products. So that's our mission simplistically.
Fantastic. So there's new competition from China in terms of EVs. There's been challenges for European car makers. You don't strike me as the sort of man who's downbeat about this. You know, there's a bright future ahead, and you're in a position where you can see this is an industry worth young people getting into. This is an industry that's going to adapt and pivot, and best days are ahead of us.
Yeah, there's some challenges with China, obviously. China's put a huge amount of investment into electric vehicles. You know, they got a very early start on electric vehicles. They've got installed capacity now to produce over 30 million battery electric vehicles a year. Their home market's not that big. So what are they doing to keep these factories busy? They're exporting. There are pros and cons for the UK. One of the pros is many of these vehicles haven't been engineered in a right-hand drive configuration, just left-hand drive, because there are more countries and more markets in the world with bigger populations that take left-hand drive. So from a business case point of view, it's the logical option to do. So the fact that many of these are not right-hand drive is in our favour. What goes against us is not having an indigenous or home car manufacturer anymore. We haven't got an MG Rover, for example, anymore. So there isn't the same brand loyalty amongst customers in the UK. They don't feel like, well, if I buy that Chinese electric car, I'm putting my neighbour who works at Renault or at Volkswagen out of a job. We don't have that same brand loyalty.
Interesting. So for you then, the opportunities for the supply chain in the UK as we're moving towards electrification, you've been doing a lot of work with companies that are looking at diversifying. What are the opportunities for the companies that are in traditional kind of engine manufacturing and automotive supply chains?
We're growing the EV supply chain. We've got some battery gigafactories coming along. We've got Envision up in the northeast. We've got Agratas down in Somerset. So that's 2 gigafactories. We know we're going to need probably 7 gigafactories by 2035. We're going to probably need around about 140 gigawatt hours per year. That's just for cars and light commercials. If we look at other, off-highway product, for example, we're going to need more than that. So there's certainly opportunities in the battery supply chain going forward. And if we look at how we pivot manufacturers who are making classic combustion engine product today, you could say exhaust systems. Quite simply, what are they doing? They're maybe cutting, forming, and joining metal. You still need to do that when you make a battery, when you look at the bus bars, for example. So some of the technology is directly interchangeable with EV technology. If we look at motors, we still need large castings for electric motor housings. So there's lots of opportunity. The Advanced Propulsion Centre, which manages on behalf of the government the Automotive Transformation Fund, that's the £1 billion that the UK government put aside in 2020 to support the industry to manage the transition from conventional propulsion technologies to zero emission. They administer that. The APC said there was probably 25 billions worth of opportunity in this decade in terms of the move to electrification for the supply chain. That good news with the last budget. There was some good news in the last budget. We've seen the Automotive Transformation Fund, that we've seen 2 billion further provisioned to help the shift to zero emission vehicles. So we eagerly await sort of announcements on how that will be deployed going forward via the Advanced Propulsion Centre. I think where we've got other opportunities are longer term with hydrogen. I think hydrogen's really exciting. While we're essentially playing catch up on battery technology with other countries, I think we've genuinely got a chance to be a step ahead with hydrogen, be that hydrogen fuel cell, or more excitingly for me, hydrogen combustion. I think hydrogen combustion is a really neat way of sweating that infrastructure which has grown up around the last 120 years, that whole supply chain, and even downstream, that whole repair industry. Because at the end of the day, there's nothing wrong with an internal combustion engine. It's the fossil fuels that they burn which are the problem. So if we can burn hydrogen cleanly in a combustion engine, I think that's a great solution for heavier vehicles, and certainly for vehicles with difficult or challenging duty cycles like construction. I mean, I applaud what JCB are doing. I think, they're really pioneering in terms of what they're doing with their hydrogen combustion on their vehicles.
This is sort of in the same way that you're getting a petrol engine modified to burn LPG, is you're custom designing new internal combustion engines for optimized for hydrogen.
Absolutely, yeah. So it's still the base reciprocating engine, it's still the crankshaft, pistons, conrods, cylinder head, but obviously it's got a gaseous fuel now, so that all the fuel system will have to change.
Fantastic. And what are the challenges there from that sort of transition into a gaseous fuel system from liquid?
One of the challenges we've got is storage for hydrogen, storage vessels. And I think there could be an opportunity in this country for hydrogen pressure vessel industry. We know that we're probably going to need around about 500,000 pressure vessels a year by the time we get to 2030 to support the demand for commercial vehicles. So I think if we look, particularly, let's come back to the Northwest and we look at the composites sort of centre of excellence we've got around the Northwest and all the sort of the materials innovation we have. So I think there's some exciting opportunities for that industry in terms of looking at pressure storage vessels, and I think it's cross-sectoral as well. I don't think we're going to see battery electric powered fighter jets anytime soon, but I certainly think we're probably going to see hydrogen powered sort of fighter planes soon. So you think about, the aerospace cluster up in Lancashire with BAE Systems. So I think there's the possibility to triangulate things here going forward.
And that's a nuance that's not or doesn't feature promptly in the debate often enough, is those expertise in steel fabrication and composites that will make the enabling technologies for fuels like hydrogen.
No, that's right, and I think it brings in, Andrew, another point into debate. I think one of the challenges we have, and I would encourage people to move out of, is the silos we work in. We tend to work in very sector-specific silos. We're aerospace, this is automotive, this is pharmaceutical, and I think there needs to be more cross-functional working. And going to the end of life and looking at the other way, if we talk about not just decarbonisation but circularity, I think there's huge scope to work cross-sectorally in terms of recycling of materials. Composites are a good example. So what might go up in the sky first generation, probably recycle second generation is good enough to be a parcel shelf in a car, perhaps, and third generation could be a drainage pipe on a construction site. But we today don't work cross-sectorally. We're very much in our own silos. So I think there's lots of exciting developments to happen there in the future.
Fantastic, and that's an opportunity. So we're moving into a period of resource scarcity, as we're moving into a period of the UK's got the most expensive energy in Europe, being able to recycle product.
Yeah, and there are challenges like that. You're right, and cross-sectoral challenges. Energy, I think our energy costs. I read the other day. I think we've got the most expensive energy in the world. We're 60% higher than the European average. That brings us back to the digital and machine monitoring, doesn't it? Because the cheapest energy is the energy you don't use. So lots of opportunity for machine monitoring there.
Fantastic. Paul, we could talk to you again, I think, about a number of different topics, but for now, thank you for joining us.
It's been a pleasure. Thanks, Andrew.
Cheers, Paul.